Welcome. My name is Peter Thomas, and I'm your CCI Auto Tape Tour host for this wonderful trip through the park. Yellowstone National Park, with its steaming geysers, boiling terraces, delicate formations, unspanned canyons, and clear free-flowing rivers, contains some of the most unusual phenomena to be seen anywhere in the world. The terrain, from undulating plains to plunging canyons to gentle mountains to over 10,000 thermal features, has something to interest everyone. Wildlife abounds with over 56 species of mammal, some 200 varieties of birds, and fish, especially trout, that swarm through the streams, rivers, and hundreds of lakes. There is so much to be seen and enjoyed in this park that extends into 3 states that you could spend weeks exploring all its exciting features. So, as to get the most from your visit, do take advantage of the many park naturalists programs that are available. They have planned many interesting activities unique to each section of the park that will help you more fully understand that area's special features. Before our tour begins, let me take a moment to explain how the tour works in case you've never taken one before. The most important thing is to try and keep your speed at about 30 miles or 48 kilometers per hour. In that way, you'll be sure that what your ears are hearing corresponds to what your eyes are seeing. The enclosed map shows all the recommended stops for tours number 1 and number 2 and the distances between each. Whenever you stop at any of the recommended viewpoints on this tour, or any place where a panoramic scene or animal catches your fancy, please remember to turn me off and keep me turned off until you resume driving along the tour route. By the way, I'm not going to be your only host on this tour. I'll be sharing the responsibility with the park guide. He'll tell you from his own personal perspective about the early visitors to the area, along with the geological, biological, and botanical features that have made Yellowstone so unique. Now, let's start sharing this wonderful park together. Our tour takes us from here some 21 miles through the beautiful Yellowstone Lake region of the park. Now, the viewing area is, rather than a scheduled stop, Gull Point Drive. This beautiful drive skirts Yellowstone Lake.
By the way, if you're planning to fish in Yellowstone, no license is required, but you must obtain a fishing permit. Now, these are free, and you may pick one up with a set of regulations at any ranger station or visitor center. Let me tell you a little about the fish that you'll find in Yellowstone. The only game fish native to the park are cutthroat trout, grayling, and mountain whitefish. The cutthroat is in all major river systems in the park and is the only game fish in Yellowstone Lake. The grayling is now protected by park regulations as an endangered species and must be returned unharmed if caught. It's mostly in the Madison and Gibbon rivers and in the upper reaches of the Gallatin. Mountain whitefish are in lower Yellowstone, Madison, Gallatin, and Snake rivers. Other game fish were introduced into the park in the late 1800s and early 1900s. These now naturalized fish include rainbow, brown, brook, and lake trout. Yellowstone Lake is the largest body of water in North America at so great an altitude. It lies 7,731 feet above sea level, covers 139 square miles, and has a 100-mile shoreline. Yellowstone Lake owes its existence to an ancient dam. At the disappearance of the ice, the lake discharged to the west to the Snake River and headed to the Pacific Ocean. It was at that time 160 feet higher in elevation than at present. Its ancient sediments and shoreline features are still somewhat visible today. Of this lake, a member of the Washburn expedition wrote, "It was like the fairest dream which ever came to bless the slumbers of a child. How still it was, what silence reigned, how lovingly it laid its hush upon you." Isn't that pretty? That's lovely. The Elephant Back Mountains are to the west, and viewing across the Yellowstone Lake, we can see rising in the distance the Absaroka Mountains, which border the lake to the east. This first island in the center is Frank Island, and is the largest island found in the lake. And shortly after that, a small island called, appropriately, Dot. The large landmass visible in the lake is Stevenson Island. Along your way, you might very well spy a small bird with a long, slightly upward-turned bill and short legs set far back on its stubby little body. Like other birds that patrol the tree trunks, the red-breasted nuthatch moves about without the aid of its tail. He not only moves laterally and upward, but he also may be seen crawling down a tree trunk in jerky circular spirals. This species feeds largely on bark insects and their larvae. It varies its diet with seeds and nuts. The nuthatch nests in a hole in a dead conifer or conifer snag and has the unique ability to fly directly into the nest cavity. The call of the red-breasted nuthatch is a nasal, oft-repeated sound, resembles the sound made by a little tin horn, like this. Red-breasted nuthatches nest in relatively open stands of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir. This peculiar bird is believed by some to have the ability, while walking upon the bark of the tree, to be able to hear the insects under the bark. Before we go any further, now seems as good a time as any to remind you of Smokey Bear's ABCs of fire prevention. A. Always hold matches till cold, then pinch to make sure. B. Be sure to drown all campfires, then stir and drown again. C. Crush out all cigarette, cigar, and pipe ashes. Use the ashtray in your car when in forest country. Remember, only you can help preserve the beauty of this national sanctuary by preventing forest fires. As we drive along, I'd like to say just a little about ecology. At various times I've referred to the predators and the prey. Such is the natural ecological balancing of the park. What sometimes seems harsh to us is both a productive and natural cycle. Nature's plan, if you will, to preserve and perpetuate the species, whether it be insect, mammal, fish, bird, tree, or any of her children. All around us is a wonderful legacy from our far-sighted forefathers. The park, under excellent present management principles, is nature controlling its own balance, the way it should be. Here, man is only a visitor. Nature reigns supreme. It was not always so. The early management, lack of funds, lack of laws to govern, and flaws in human nature started the fine national park idea off on the wrong foot. Only in trial and error, over decades, has man come to learn that Mother Nature, left alone, takes care of her own in her own way. She's continually taught us that our interference only serves to cause imbalance. Her ways sometimes seem cruel, as when we see a newborn elk calf struggling to outrun the lion, only to be pulled down and killed before it really has a chance to experience life. Man, in his infinite wisdom, sought to pen game animals such as bison in order to assure visitors of seeing them day or night. He at times chained bear cubs to trees or fed them garbage in order to attract them to a particular spot for his amusement, degrading both himself and the animals. He carted off samples of geyser cones, destroying large areas of the basins, took countless tons of fish from the lakes, sometimes to feed hotel guests, other times in order to stand before a catch of hundreds of fish for the sake of having his picture taken. He killed trumpeter swans for their elegant feathers, stole eggs, and clubbed baby pelicans to reduce the total catch of fish by the pelicans. both with disastrous effects. He trapped, poisoned, and shot predators such as the magnificent lion and cunning timber wolf almost to complete extinction to protect the herds of elk and bison. Then he shot the elk and bison for skins or trophy heads, which could be sold back east at that time for as much as $300 each. He tossed soap, rags, or other objects into the hot pools to cause eruptions until he destroyed the activities of the pools themselves. Through all, there were a growing number of concerned officials, citizens, and congressmen attempting to effect a purpose of complete protection in a natural state for this grand park. Without a doubt, the predecessors of today's superintendents, rangers, and others who over the last 100 years, however ill-advised, were well-intentioned. Perhaps the greatest testimonial to positive human efforts is the fact that not a single species of plant or animal originally found by man in Yellowstone has been completely exterminated. Though the relative abundance of certain species may have shifted, everything is still here. We can only be grateful that their overall efforts helped to bring ultimate success. Today's guardians are making sure that our children's children have an opportunity to enjoy what we have today. On this subject, let me just a moment remind you that picking wildflowers or collecting specimens of animals, trees, or minerals in all national parks and monuments is prohibited without special permission from the park superintendent. Study the plants where they grow, take home photographs of them, but leave them for the enjoyment of those who will follow. This breathtaking wonderland is a naturalist's and a geologist's paradise, and is the oldest wildlife preserve in the United States. Here, as I mentioned, man is only a visitor. Nature is supreme. And this brings to mind a story from Yellowstone's colorful past. Let me share this thriller with you now. In 1870, while exploring the Yellowstone area, Truman C. Everts, an older member of the Washburn Party, drifted from his companions. This 54-year-old man did not know the ways of the wilderness very well, and he made several serious mistakes. When he dismounted his horse, he left the animal untied. It ran away, carrying all of Everts' supplies on its back. In his excitement, Everts lost his glasses. Now the man was really in trouble because, being nearsighted, he could see only a short distance. Mr. Everts' horse was gone, he had no food, and he was unable to see clearly farther than a few inches from his face. He shouted until he lost his voice, ran in circles as he sought to retrace his steps. Wandering around aimlessly, he chanced upon Heart Lake and slept near the hot springs there in order to keep warm. The howl of coyotes sent shivers down his spine, for he didn't understand the night cries of the wilderness. He chewed on thistle roots cooked in the hot springs to satisfy his hunger. Later, remembering that he had field glasses, Everts made a fire, which helped to keep him warm. All during these days, he wandered about, but found no clue as to the whereabouts of his fellow explorers. Mr. Everts lighted another fire, but it blazed out of control, and he had to flee from its flaming fury. On 2 separate occasions, Everts went for days without food, and amazingly without water, in this land of countless streams, rivers, and lakes. For 2 weeks, the Washburn Party waited for Mr. Everts. Every day they sent out a searching party, and also lighted signal fires, not knowing that these signs did no good because Everts' nearsighted eyes could not see the smoke. Members of the Washburn Party tried every way they knew to find the lost man, but finally they could wait no longer. Their food was almost gone. Nearly a foot of snow had fallen. They must hasten home before winter really set in. Well, when the Washburn Party reached home, 2 well-known scouts, Jack Baronet and George Pritchett, heard about the missing Truman Everts and set out to search for him. Finally, they found the man, not far from the landscape feature now known as Mount Everts. The lost explorer, his supply of thistle roots gone, his fire smothered by new fallen snow, his mind on the brink of insanity and almost frozen. Everts was near death's door. He weighed only a scant 50 pounds after 37 days of wandering in the Yellowstone wilderness. The scouts carried Everts to a trapper's cabin where they cared for him with a special home remedy. They gave him a pint of bear grease to swallow. Lord only knows why this didn't kill the poor man. Following that, however, a few days of rest and good food actually did give Everts strength enough to be taken home. Mr. Everts did regain his health and lived to be 85 years old. He always said that he was glad for his trip to Yellowstone. If you choose to take the east entrance road toward the famous Fishing Bridge, that's 1 mile east of the junction, you'll find campground facilities with campsites. Fishing Bridge is known as a living museum. If you walk onto the bridge and keep a sharp lookout, chances are you'll see some of the frequent visitors to this lush, aquatic area, such as the cutthroat trout, pelicans, gulls, and the moose. The Pelican Valley, northeast of Fishing Bridge, is another backcountry area of breathtaking beauty. Pelican Creek bisects the wide valley for almost 10 miles. Both valley and stream narrow toward the northern end. Moose, bison, elk, and occasional grizzly, bald eagles, and sandhill cranes are only a few of the wildlife species observed. The trail continues up Mist Creek over Mirror Plateau and along the Lamar River to the highway. A dinner of cutthroat trout can easily be harvested in less than an hour from most areas along Pelican Creek.
Your upcoming facilities at Bridge Bay and Lake Village include a campground, general store, hotel, lodge, cottages, hospital, marina, boats, fishing supplies, service station, ranger station, and amphitheater. You may turn me off now while you visit the famous Fishing Bridge.
Our next viewpoint is at the Mud Volcano area. Please drive carefully. You know, it's a sad fact that the bald eagle, our national bird and long a symbol of strength and courage, is in fact an endangered species. Increased use of pesticides, the loss of habitat have combined to greatly diminish the eagle's numbers throughout the United States. Although the population density of the eagle in Yellowstone was probably never significantly higher than present, recent studies indicate that the eagle reproduction has decreased notably in the past 2 decades. The eagle's preferred habitat is near water in the park. However, a study in Yellowstone indicated that less than half the eagle's diet is made up of fish. This study revealed that birds, primarily ducks, constitute more than half the eagle's diet. With its pronounced white head, crooked beak, and deeply curved talons, extremely powerful eyesight, and 7-foot wingspread, the bald eagle is truly an impressive bird. Breeding populations in Yellowstone are largely confined to Yellowstone Lake. Look for the eagle at Lake Hayden Valley, the lower valley of the Yellowstone River, and at the Madison River. Near lakes and streams, let's watch closely for the osprey. The osprey has a nickname called the fishhawk, which accurately describes this old fellow. His diet is entirely made up of fish. The average consumption of an adult osprey is approximately 1 pound a day. Magnificently adapted to this specialty, the osprey has a strong hooked beak, excellent eyesight and talons especially adapted to fish catching. The talons of the osprey have sharp spines which aid the bird in grasping its prey. A conspicuous crook or bend in the wing and a black wrist mark near the crook are excellent flight field marks. Research conducted in Yellowstone revealed that human activity near nesting spots can have an adverse effect on breeding success. Like the bald eagle, the osprey is a fisherman. However, he's a more skilled one, in fact, and he's frequently seen at Yellowstone Lake, Hayden Valley, Snake River, and Yellowstone Canyon. From any of these canyon overlooks, watch for the osprey soaring back and forth over the river. Now, if you look carefully, you might spy one going to its nest, perched on a rocky pinnacle on the side of the canyon. Well adapted for its way of life, this smaller relative of the eagle lives exclusively on fish captured diving swiftly through the sky and then plunging feet first into the water. Although its head is largely white, it shouldn't be confused with the adult bald eagle, whose head and tail are both entirely snow white, with the rest of the body dark. The osprey is blackish above and clear white below, the only bird of prey so marked. The declining osprey, peregrine falcon, and the bald eagle are unfortunate testimonials to the lack of respect and consideration man has shown to his environment. For years, man has carelessly used a wide assortment of pesticides, unaware of the effect they might have on the ecosystem. Consequently, many of the bird species on top of the food chain have accumulated dangerously high concentrations of toxic chemicals. Chlorinated hydrocarbons seem to be the most toxic. These chemicals affect the calcium metabolism, and thus thin-shelled eggs are laid that are easily broken. The bald eagle has been reported to have laid an egg with only a membrane supporting the embryo. Fortunately, the osprey, peregrine falcon, and the bald eagle still soar over the wilderness of Yellowstone, but their time is limited. What a tragedy that Americans have almost destroyed these species, one of which is their national emblem. It's an interesting fact to note that the birds, such as eagles, osprey, pelican, great blue heron, and birds that prey upon fish in the park, take from Yellowstone Lake alone in a year's time over 200,000 pounds of fresh fish. And this does not include the streams and rivers in the park where the birds also fish. That's a lot of fish. Somewhere along the way, you're sure to see some of the over 1,100 bison that make their home in the park. The largest ungulate, and mistakenly called the buffalo, he's a massive ox-like animal weighing up to 3,000 pounds and standing up to 6 feet tall at the shoulder, which is raised in a distinctive hump, giving a hunchback appearance. He's brown in color, with hair on the head, neck, shoulders, and forelegs, long and shaggy. The forehead is broad and is flanked by 2 short curving horns, a trait familiar to both male and female. Once, some 50 million bison roamed in herds from northern Canada to as far south as the Mexican border. By 1889, there were only 540 left. The American Indian relied on the bison as a major staple in their diet. The bison supplied meat, both fresh and dried, hides for clothing, bedding, tents and canoes, dung for fuel, bones, hides, and tendons for weapons, tools, and utensils. Not surprisingly, the bison appeared in the Indians' religion as a powerful figure to be worshipped. There were also rituals to ensure that there was a plentiful supply of bison. Or if the bison did not turn up on their annual migration, the Indians would face a lean time. They believed that the buffalo sprang up every year, and that it was necessary to lure them to their hunting ground, and that rites had to be performed to ensure that they would be plentiful. Skulls of bison were considered to be extremely useful for these rituals. They were piled up or displayed in a prominent place because it was thought that the bison would seek out their white-faced companions. In other rites, oracles were consulted to find out where the buffalo were. The medicine men who performed these services acquired great merit because they continued their ceremonies and incantations until the bison arrived, as they were bound to do if the Indians were waiting on a regular migration route. Unfortunately, there came a time when the bison did fail to arrive. The white man had contrived to kill them all and starve the Indians. To the Indians, wanton killing of bison was the equivalent of cattle rustling for the white man, and also punishable by death. Wars broke out as the Indians saw both their territory and their livelihood disappearing. Some enlightened men sought to safeguard both, but many others claimed the extermination of bison was the only way of civilizing the Indians. Always a good excuse for land grabbing. Well, without the bison, the Indian culture died. For centuries, their economy had been based on the bison, but as it has often happened, technological advance had failed to bring happiness. The ability of the Indians to get supplies of bison without horses, firearms, and other refinements is shown by a remarkable discovery in Colorado during 1957. Wind erosion uncovered a small gulch or ravine, some 6 to 7 feet deep. Within the gulch were the remains of nearly 200 bison. Most of them had been carefully butchered, the limbs dismembered, and the bones piled up. With a knowledge of the hunting methods of present-day Indians, it was possible to work out in detail what had happened some 8,000 years before. A party of Indians had crept up on a herd of bison from downwind. Not being able to smell them, the bison had not realized that they were there until the Indians were on them. The bison panicked and stampeded toward the gulch and toppled in. The first ones were crushed to death by the others, and the rest were killed by the waiting Indians. The carcasses were then hauled out and rolled onto their bellies. An incision was made down the back, and the skin stripped off and laid either side of the body to receive the meat as it was cut off. The Indians probably ate as they worked, each man eating 10 to 20 pounds of fresh meat a day. The archaeologist who excavated these bones calculated that this one kill provided some 65,000 pounds of food, and that it probably fed a party of 150 Indians for a month. The bulk would have been eaten at once, and some would have been dried. If they were always so lucky in their hunting, these Indians would have lived an easy life, and we can well understand their descendants' dismay at the disappearance of the bison. The white man was the major reason for the near extinction of the bison. Men colorful in our American history, such as William Cody, better known as Buffalo Bill, and others who slaughtered bison for the army and railroads, did much to bring down the Indian way of life. Today, although the population, through careful management, is once again increasing in numbers, the bison is limited to only a few protected areas, such as Yellowstone. The best areas to see and photograph bison in the park in summer are Mirror Plateau, Madison Pitchstone Plateaus, and the drive through Hayden Valley. Now remember, when viewing bison, keep your distance. Never come between a mother and her calf or too close to a solitary bull. Many visitors have been injured in the past as a result of being charged by this animal. You know, over 1 ton of animal is very hard to stop. The Mud Volcano Area pullout should be coming up shortly now. This is one of the most interesting areas in Yellowstone, geologically, but not one of the most pleasant from the standpoint of smell, I must say, but it really is too good to miss. So consider taking the 2/3 mile walk. The Mud Cauldron and Mud Geyser bubble mud, and so stay out of the way of flying mud. The odor in the area is from hydrogen sulfide, which is the same gas that forms in a rotten egg. The gray colors in this area come from clay particles in the lava rock beneath. Dragon's Mouth gets its name because the water, which darts out like a hot, flickering tongue, is reminiscent of the tales of the fire-breathing dragons slain by St. George. All right, now why don't you turn me off until after your stop, and you pulled back onto the Grand Loop Road. All right? Enjoy your stop. If you were to travel from the valleys up the reaches of the mountains, you could actually observe the changes in plant and animal life. As we rise and the climate gets colder, vegetation grows gradually more sparse. Animals and most of the birds shrink in numbers. Trees and shrubs become more and more dwarfed until finally there is scarcely any sign of life, except the scanty moss and lichen at the top of the mountains. In biology, the different climate in which different life forces can exist are called climate belts. Naturally, where there are high and low elevations, there would be more climate belts than on the prairie. The sturdy trees you see in the valley and on the lower mountain slopes, and the twisted, weather-beaten trees of the higher regions, are also an integral part of Yellowstone National Park. Why are some trees powerfully strong and others delicate and weak? Well, among the many factors affecting the growth of a tree are soil, moisture, temperature, and light. The type, size, and condition of a tree is indicative of the soil and climatic conditions in the area in which it grows. In other parts of the world, there are many species of trees. A tropical forest may, for example, have nearly 300 different kinds. Yellowstone has only 11 species of trees, and these are divided into broad classifications: the coniferous, or cone-bearing trees, and the broadleaved. The coniferous generally bear their fruit in a woody cone and have long, slender leaves, which we usually call needles. The leaves of all the park's broadleaf trees are characterized by broad, thin leaves, usually round or oval, and borne on a stem. Of Yellowstone's 11 species of trees, 7 are conifers. They're the lodgepole pine, whitebark pine, limber pine, subalpine fir, Douglas fir, Engelmann spruce, and Rocky Mountain juniper. Now, the lodgepole pine accounts for about 80% of the forest area in the park. Lodgepole pine reaches about 70 feet and is easily recognizable due to its thick growth and very straight, slender trunk. It's the only pine with just 2 needles in a cluster. The lodgepole was used by Indians for the framework for their teepees or lodges, and that's how the species first got its name. This tree also has an interesting feature that accounts for its wide and predominant range. When forest fire burns off an area of timber, the heat causes the cones to fall and then burst open. The seeds of the lodgepole start new trees almost at once and are always the first trees to grow back after a fire. A tree you're most likely to recognize is the Douglas fir, most important lumber tree in the world. Although you'll see it in the park growing up to 200 feet tall, the thick-barked tree with flat, flexible needles may be more familiar to you when it's smaller. This is one of the prime fir trees grown commercially, trimmed, and sold as Christmas trees. On the drier slopes, I'd like to suggest that you look for the Rocky Mountain juniper. It's a small, brushy tree, often with several trunks, having mostly scale-like leaves and berry-like seed cones, which Indians ate as food in late summer or fall. In times of food shortages, they even consume the inner bark, although I'm not too sure I would want to eat bark. Have to be awfully hungry. Interspersed with the pine are occasional climax forests of Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir. The young fir is pyramidal in shape with upslanting branches. The towering mature fir is barren along the outer ends of the branches. Spruce trees have short, flexible needles about an inch long and more open than those of the lodgepole pine. 3 broadleaf trees are common in the park: the black and narrow-leaf cottonwood trees and quaking aspen. Of the broadleaf trees, the largest is the black cottonwood, usually found growing along the watercourses and lakes at lower elevations. I think you'd probably agree that the quaking aspen is one of the prettiest trees, especially if you're here in the fall when the leaves turn fantastic shades of yellow and gold. This tree is so named because its delicate leaves tremble and rustle, even in the slightest breeze. The bark is a thin white or yellowish green, and the bases of the older trees are roughened and black. The bark will carry scars for the life of the tree, and close examination will reveal some of the tree's history. Now, if you see a quaking aspen whose bark looked as if someone had cut a crossword puzzle pattern in black and white, that's where an elk has chewed, probably during time of extreme cold and deep snows of winter. On the other hand, look for long gouges running down the length of the tree trunk. If you find some of these, you can bet a bear or two stopped by to sharpen his claws. In Yellowstone, the bighorn or mountain sheep may be a leftover from the earliest post-glacial period, when favorable habitat was much more extensive, supporting a larger population than presently exists. About 700 bighorn sheep presently live on the steep, rocky, partially wooded slopes and alpine areas. Today, with a more moderate climate, forests have increased, and true alpine areas are limited to higher peaks. Thus, the bighorn population is also limited. In summer, the bighorn rams beat it to the hills and higher regions in the northeast sector of the park, and they hide out there until after tourist season. Mount Washburn area is an ideal place to see them by hiking the road or trail to the top. His female counterpart, the ewe, doesn't seem to mind the visitors as much, and you may very well see her with one or two of her lambs grazing in the meadows below timberline. In winter, most of the bighorn migrate to lower elevations due to the heavy snows, becoming mostly concentrated in the area between Mammoth and Gardner on the base of Mount Everts. They're often seen above the road in Gardner Canyon, on the cliffs of the Yellowstone River near Tower, and on slopes above where Soda Butte Creek enters Lamar River. Because bighorn occupy a specialized habitat to which few other animals are so well adapted and which these mountain sheep use to escape, they're relatively safe from predators. When migrating, however, they must cross territory where their sure-footedness is of no special advantage. They might be taken by cougars or other large predators. Lambs, during their first week or two of life, are subject to predation even by the smaller coyotes. Bighorns are easily distinguished from other Yellowstone ungulates by their color. Both the ram and the ewe are dirty yellow or light grayish-brown with a creamy white rump patch. Rams have huge curled dark horns and weigh anywhere from 200 to 300 pounds. The ewe's horns are much smaller, and she usually doesn't weigh more than, 175 pounds. One of the most graceful and picturesque of all birds, the rare trumpeter swan, once bred from Alaska to Wyoming and east to Missouri and Indiana. Commercial demands for swan feathers in the last century drastically reduced the number of trumpeters. By the early 1930s, fewer than 70 birds bred in the wild south of Alaska. The preservation of habitat and protection of swans in Yellowstone and some of the neighboring areas, and later in the Grand Tetons, helped to preserve the species. It specialized in its breeding habitat requirements. The trumpeter swan needs a shallow, quiet, freshwater environment with relatively stable water levels and marshy edges. In this environment, the trumpeter swan builds a mounded nest of bush rushes, sedges, or cattails, and raises a brood of up to a half-dozen small swans, called cygnets. It's the largest of all swans, and the trumpeter may achieve a length of 65 inches, a wingspread of 6 to 9 feet. Several pairs of these elegant swans, which mate for life, breed in suitable habitats in both Yellowstone and the Grand Teton National Parks. One of the rarest birds in America, the beautiful trumpeter can yet be seen by an alert visitor in the park in summer. Some swans remain in the park throughout the year in areas where there is open water. To catch sight of the trumpeter swan, look on the larger lakes, the Madison and Yellowstone rivers, and in Hayden Valley. The trumpeter can be distinguished from the whistling swan, a migrant and winter resident, but not a breeder in the park, by a much louder, lower-pitched, more bugle-like voice. His voice sounds something like this. Listen also for the shrill call of the sandhill crane as it echoes its call through almost every grassland. Another stately fellow, the great blue heron, is a large, long-necked, stilt-legged wading bird with a spear-like bill. He uses this bill like an expert to catch fish, frogs, snakes, and other prey. It's often referred to incorrectly as a crane. It's solitary in habit except during breeding season. Has a slight hunchbacked appearance due to the fact that the blue heron neck is folded and the legs are held stiffly behind the body. You'll probably spot a large white bird, which seems very humorous to many who observe him. He's known as the white pelican. It's a ponderous bird with an enlarged bill and a large bill pouch. However, the white pelican is a fishing specialist with a somewhat limited distribution in the park. They nest and raise their young in large concentrations on the remote southern Mali Island in the southeast section of Yellowstone Lake. A gregarious species, the white pelicans nest in colonies and share the responsibilities of rearing their young. In contrast with its cousin, the brown pelican, which dives for its fish prey, the white pelican fishes while swimming buoyantly on the surface. The large pouch, approximately 18 inches long and 6 inches deep in an adult bird, is employed as a fish scoop. In spite of their great size, white pelicans are efficient flyers, able to soar for hours once aloft. One of the most peaceful sights, the Canada goose, uses the 2 flyways located over Yellowstone. Many of these make their homes here, breeding and raising their young in the park's abundant waters. The Canada goose is, by the way, the largest of all wild geese, and its joyful honking and V formations are familiar sights throughout the American Northwest. A Canada goose feeds mainly on large plants, seeds, and grasses, but is an excellent swimmer and can also get food from the mud and water strained through its bill. Thus it chooses to build its nest near the water. This gray-brown bird has a light-colored breast, black head and neck, and a white chin patch. A large Canada goose in the wild can weigh more than 20 pounds. Your upcoming facilities at Canyon Village include a campground with campsites. Also in the area to be found are a general store, photo shop, service station, lodge, motel, dining room, cafeteria, coffee shop, self-service laundry, public showers, saddle horses, amphitheater, post office, ranger station, and visitor center. Incidentally, I'd like to remind you this visitor center has information, publications, and exhibits of the geology of Yellowstone. In addition, a very fine 11-minute slide program is shown every half hour. Oh, say, by the way, Canyon Village Campground is restricted to hard-sided camping units only. No tents or tent trailers. This restriction is made due to the frequency of bears in the area. I'd like to remind you again, too, to watch for your signs. And while you're enjoying the visitor center and spectacular canyon area, I think I'll just take a moment and rest my voice.
I hate to interrupt right now, but you must turn your tape over. If you feel the magnificence of the scenery you have already seen can hardly be equaled, then even more pleasures await you on the other side of this tape.
Let me tell you how Yellowstone got its name. The Yellowstone comes from a Minnetree Indian word, Mitsiadazi, which means rock yellow river. The Indian name appeared first in French as Roche Jean and Pierre Jean, through translation by such French Canadians as Old Menard, the squaw man who settled with the Mandan Indians in 1776. The first full translation of the river's name into English was made by David Thompson, explorer-geographer, who visited the Mandan towns near present Bismarck, North Dakota, during the winter of 1797 to 1798. He located the stream quite accurately from Indian information and called it Yellowstone. Lewis and Clark referred to the Yellowstone River both by the French designations and, as Thompson had, separating the word into two parts. But down through time, usage has formalized the name as a single word that's known throughout the world, Yellowstone. Like all national parks in America, Yellowstone comes under the supervision of the United States Department of the Interior. Under their aegis, the park is staffed by members of the National Park Service. The park rangers who patrol and protect the park are courteous and friendly and anxious to help you enjoy your visit to their park. But they're also zealous guardians, so please obey their rules about not feeding animals, not picking flowers, and so forth. You know, Yellowstone is truly blessed with an abundant supply of bird life. Almost every species of bird of prey found in western United States can be seen in the park. The rare great gray owl, largest of our North American owls, can be seen perched along the roadways waiting for the unwary mice to emerge from the safety of their burrows. Golden eagle, prairie falcons, and the magnificent peregrine falcon, swiftest and rarest of our raptorial species, are present in small numbers. The Madison, Firehole, Gibbon, and Yellowstone rivers are teeming with waterfowl and shorebirds. White pelicans, trumpeter swans, Canada geese, and the great blue heron are just a few of the many species commonly observed. Many species of inland waterfowl inhabit Yellowstone Park or can be seen during their migration. Sharp eyes, keen ears, a pair of binoculars, and knowing where to look all aid in observing wildlife. The meadows are lined with thousands of geese and ducks returning to their summer nesting areas. The visitor interested in the birds of Yellowstone should spend a large portion of his time along the Yellowstone River, from the Upper Falls to Yellowstone Lake. Pelicans, trumpeter swans, ducks, geese, shorebirds, bald eagles, golden eagles, osprey, owls, hawks, and a wide variety of perching birds could be seen in a single day. This section of the river is truly the bird watcher's paradise. The National Park Service has recognized this unique area for some time. Consequently, much of the area is closed to fishing to protect the many species nesting there. One bird you may see as you drive along this road is the hawk. Probably the worst damage an occasional hawk does is to go after some farmer's chickens. Nevertheless, this has earned him a reputation as a ruthless predator and has given hunters an excuse to shoot hawks indiscriminately. And that's unfortunate. Most naturalists agree hawks are valuable because they do prey mostly on harmful rodents and insects. Another bird you'll probably see as we travel on the Grand Loop Road is the cowbird. Now, it doesn't say moo. Its sound is more like this. Most people don't realize it, and I really hate to be a gossip, but truthfully, the cowbird is something of a moocher. You see, it doesn't build its own nest, simply moves to another bird's nest and lays its eggs there. Actually, the cowbird is very friendly and not at all people shy. If one feels like perching on your shoulder, it will, unless you shoo it away. The large blackbird seen in the lower elevations of the park is the raven. The raven and the crow are similar enough so that some people can't tell the difference. The raven sounds like this. And here's the crow sound. The raven is large, at least half again as large as the crow. It's something of a loner and soars gracefully through the air. The crow is more of a flapper and prefers traveling in groups. All right, quiz time. Can you recognize this bird call? You can't? Well, let me give you another clue as to his identity. He has striking black and white plumage, long wedge-shaped tail, and is best known as a mischief monger. That's right. It's the yakety magpie. This glossy-backed bird lives in the park throughout the year, but has a habit of disappearing to heaven knows where at the height of the tourist season. Our best chance to see the magpie is in the lower Gardiner and Yellowstone River valleys and along Slough Creek and Lamar River. It's the only black and white land bird with a long tail. Throughout the park, and almost anywhere there's water, you're bound to see a tremendous variety of water birds, including many species of ducks, geese, gulls, terns, and waders. But probably the most fascinating bird in the park is the thoroughly delightful water ouzel. This little bird is so different and so unique that many a bird lover has been known to tramp miles and miles just to get a glimpse of him. The water ouzel is scarcely as big as a robin. It's gray and has unwebbed feet. It will often build its nest behind the sprays of a cascading waterfall and is mostly seen bobbing and dipping on the rocks of a rushing stream or skimming the surface of some busy waters. Although it's certainly one of the most cheerful birds around, it's usually quiet in the summertime. I'd like to talk to you about a rarely seen resident of our park, the cougar, a sleek, graceful, powerful cat, generally called a mountain lion in the Rockies. In other parts of the country, it also goes by the name of puma, panther, or catamount. An estimated 100 cougars lived in Yellowstone in the first decade of this century, but they were almost wiped out in the prolonged anti-predator campaign in this region. For reasons we don't fully understand, they have never recovered and are so scarce now as to have little impact on the park's ecology. These big cats are always associated with deer, and in fact they're unknown outside of deer range. In Yellowstone, they probably subsist chiefly on the mule deer, although they will take smaller animals occasionally. Years ago, they apparently depended on elk as their main food source. Cougars may in time increase in number again. Only by the sheerest accident will you see a wild cougar. Very few people have, except hunters hunting outside the park who use dogs to tree this quarry. If by remote chance you do encounter a big cat with a long tail, don't be alarmed. A wild mountain lion is never a threat to man. If by chance you spot a mountain lion, wolverine, or gray wolf, would you please report it to a park official? Although it has not been seen around for a long time, it's believed that an occasional gray wolf still roams the park. There are, however, a lot of coyotes in the park, and it's not uncommon to see one slinking across the road at night. You may even see one strolling near this roadway during the day. The daily menu of these predators may consist of anything from rodents to deer. The mountain coyote is lean, has a shaggy gray-brown coat, and is usually larger than the prairie coyote. I'd like to take this moment to remind you that picking wildflowers or collecting specimens of animals, trees, or minerals in all national parks and monuments is prohibited without special permission from the park superintendent. Why not study the plants where they grow? Take home photographs of them. but leave them for the enjoyment of those who will follow. Our next viewpoint, Tower Falls viewing area, comes up quite fast. So once again, it's time to turn me off, but remember to turn me back on when you leave the Tower Falls parking and concession area. Calcite Springs Overlook. Look for the signs that will lead you to a parking area. From the parking area, a short boardwalk takes you to a spectacular view of the Yellowstone Canyon, capped by vertical columns of lava. Now, don't forget your camera, for goodness sake. You're sure to want a picture of this beautiful, majestic canyon. Before we go too far along, I should tell you which animals we're likely to see near the roads in this section of the park. In winter, spring, and fall, bison will be seen quietly feeding quite near the road, especially in the lower reaches of the Hayden Valley. The elk are predominant here in spring and fall, and sometimes an occasional grizzly can also be found along this route. The bighorn ram usually can be found near the summit of Mount Washburn. You may want to keep your camera right handy, as most visitors will have many chances to take pictures of the animals and bird life on this section of road. Now, find yourself a good parking spot. Please turn me off now, but remember, turn me back on when you're back on the Grand Loop Road. One truly interesting area nearby is a glacier called Grasshopper Glacier. Now, Grasshopper Glacier is not in Yellowstone National Park, but rather in the wilderness section of the Custer National Forest, administered by the Forest Service. This glacier, which is hard to reach, is near Cook City, Montana. It's a shrinking ice mass which probably has lost more than half its volume in the past 40 years. Scattered through it are the remains of many grasshoppers, which were blown up into the mountains by strong west winds. The grasshoppers came from Nevada, Oregon, and possibly Northern California. It's probably inaccurate to say that the grasshoppers flew over the glaciers. Rather, they were carried in air masses that swept over the mountains. As velocity decreased along the mountain ridges, the grasshoppers fell to earth, where they died. Those that fell on the ice were preserved. The best way to reach the glacier is to drive through Cook City, turning north on a dirt road before reaching the Cook Ranger Station. About 2 miles up the road, park your car at an abandoned mine and hike up the Jeep Road to Goose Lake.
Your upcoming facilities at Tower Junction and Roosevelt Lodge include cabins, general store, service station, saddle horses, stagecoach rides, and a ranger station. Turn me off now and back on after you've passed through Tower Junction.
We'll pass by Floating Island Lake in the upper Pleasant Valley. Further east and along the fringes of the Lamar River and north of the park's northeast entrance road is Mount Hornaday. That stands 10,036 feet. Baronet Peak, 10,404, and Abather Peak, both nearby, rise breathlessly 10,928 feet above sea level. This area, though not the highest, is certainly among the most rugged and beautiful mountain areas within the park region. Often bypassed by the visitor, the fossil forests of Yellowstone National Park are in many respects the most remarkable of their kind thus far known in any part of the world. They're unique, as they occur in an area more extensive than any other known fossil forests, covering more than 40 square miles. This area lies just ahead, in the northeast portion of the park, in the uplands between the Yellowstone and Lamar River valleys. The great majority of the fossil trees are to be found still standing upright, perhaps in the exact positions in which they originally grew. Most other so-called fossil forests of the world, such as those of Arizona, California, Egypt, are actually drifted logs and stumps lying scattered at random in the enclosing rocks. The volcanic ash deposits in the Yellowstone Park fossil forests have yielded, in addition to hundreds of upright petrified trees, many thousand beautifully preserved impressions of the leaves, twigs, needles, and cones of over 100 different kinds of plants. No other fossil forest in the world contains so prolific and so complete a representation of the original vegetation. The fossil forests display not just a single forest, but a vertical succession of 27 or more distinct forests of varying compositions within the thickness of about 2,000 feet of volcanic ash, breccia, and mud flows. Please turn me off now, but remember, don't forget to turn me on again when you're back on the Grand Loop Road after your stop. The first group of explorers with an interest based solely on curiosity rather than profit came in 1869. The purpose of the Folsom, Cook, Peterson party was seeing what this land contained. Accounts led to exploration by the Washburn-Langford-Doane party. In 1870, Henry Washburn, a young lawyer appointed as Surveyor General of Montana Territory, led an exploration of intelligent, accomplished men to prove or disprove earlier accounts of unbelievable tales. Well, not without troubles, they explored the territory in wonderment. Among their accomplishments were named and measured Tower Falls, named and studied principal geysers, including Old Faithful, and suggested to influential persons that the land be set aside for all to enjoy, not to be settled and used for personal gain. Cornelius Hedges was said to be the first to put this theory in writing in a diary he kept on this exploration trip, hardly dreaming such a thing was possible. Due to the enthusiasm exerted by Hedges and Washburn after their expedition, Congress appropriated $40,000 for an official survey of the area. Ferdinand V. Hayden led this geological survey in 1871, which included artists, scientists, physicians, and a photographer named William H. Jackson. The pictures he made have survived as classics that captured both the splendor of the country and the drama of its exploration. This geological survey finally proved that absurd tales of shooting geysers and boiling pools were true. They brought back magnificent sketches and photos of breathtaking mountain vistas and waterfalls. All this led to the bill which kept the area from settlement, occupancy, or sale under the laws of the United States and set aside for the enjoyment of the people. It could become nothing else, since it was not even part of the United States. Wyoming and Montana were territories that would not even become states for 20 years after this bill passed Congress. On May 10, 1872, Nathaniel P. Langford, who had been a member of the Washburn expedition, was appointed the first park superintendent. But the idea of a section of land set aside this way was too new, and no regulations or laws were set to protect it. Also, there were no funds allocated for maintenance. Langford suffered the frustrations of realizing the potential, yet not being able to develop and protect the park. Vandalism, poaching, destruction of natural features, and fires burning out of control were all problems these first officials had to deal with, even though they had no stronger authority than to eject the violators from the park. In 1877, Langford's successor was Philetus W. Norris of Michigan. During his 5 years in office, he was considered one of the most important characters in the history of the park. This colorful man was above all else an explorer. He penetrated all areas of the park region and contributed greatly to the study of the history and antiquities of the park. We owe more to him than to anyone for evidence of the former presence of white men in that region. His other accomplishments included opening regions of the park by means of poorly designed roads and awakening a strong public interest in regard to the park by his articles in the Norris Suburban, a paper at that time widely read throughout the West. Norris made valuable advances during his administration. However, he failed in practice to protect the park. His successor, Patrick H. Conger of Iowa, drew severe criticism for the same behavior. Conger's administration began in 1882 and marked the lowest ebb of the park's misfortunes. It was in the winter of 1884 that an attempt was made to correct the grave situation. An act was passed placing legal protection under the control of territorial legislation. The act was designed to protect and preserve the timber, game, fish, and natural curiosities of the park. However, an attempt at territorial control of a national institution was a big mistake. The officials chosen and deemed assistant superintendents were tyrannical and not designed to create a respect for the new authority. The unpopularity of the new plan was so extreme that the act was repealed March 10, 1886. Well, the difficulties of the administration of the park became too great now, and Conger resigned his position July 28, 1884. Though his assistant superintendents were notoriously inefficient, if not possibly corrupt, no charge of dishonesty was ever brought against him personally. This was not to be the end of the perils to beset the park. August 4th, 1884, Robert E. Carpenter was appointed superintendent. During his 9 months in office, he very nearly succeeded in carrying a measure through Congress by which important tracts of land were to be open to private occupancy. Fortunately, the measure failed. The scandal of Carpenter's actions led to his prompt removal from office. On the day Carpenter was removed, May 29, 1885, Colonel David W. Ware of Missouri was appointed. He at once saw the need and was ambitious to see that things were righted. However, he was soon to find that he must pay for the wrongdoings of his predecessors. The time for drastic change had come. The Secretary of the Interior, under whose control the park had been placed, requested assistance from the Secretary of War, and control was granted by Congress, who relinquished authority to the officers and soldiers of the Army. On August 20th, 1886, Captain Moses Harris replaced the civilian superintendent, and soldiers became the park police. As soon as a show of real authority was shown by competent and honest enforcers, a great part of the difficulties were over. Captain Harris was vigorous and uncompromising in suppressing lawlessness, just and fair in his rulings, and always aware of a watchful public eye. Military administration prevailed for 30 years, and during this period improvements were numerous. Roads, trails, hotels were either built or improved. The military did its job well, and needed legislation for funds and for law and order soon followed. However, trial and error seemed to prevail yet in the area of animal control. You see, never before had man been put in control of what Mother Nature had always handled. To admit that they did a vastly inadequate job would be too mild a statement, and in August 1916, Congress established the National Park Service, and a new idea on the regulation of wildlife was conceived. The rangers and officials to uphold this idea were rugged men who at times risked their own lives to see that the park was protected and the wildlife undisturbed. As in any national park, it's the hiker or the horseback rider who benefits most. Getting off the main highway and going even for a short trek means getting away from civilization, realizing the full extent of nature's gifts. Although there are less than 250 miles of paved roads for automobile travel, there are well over 1,000 miles of trails for the walker or rider in Yellowstone. Most of the trails are well marked and easy to get to from all campgrounds, parking areas, points of interest, and hotels. Trail trips vary from 15-minute hikes to ones that last for several days. If you go by foot, you might need a guide, for it's never a good idea to go it alone. It's wise also to get a topographical map that shows where the trails, lakes, and mountains are, especially if you're planning to hike in the backcountry. You can buy a topographical map at visitor centers, park headquarters, hotels, and other places throughout the park. Whether or not you're an experienced hiker, you must register your hiking plans and pick up a backcountry hiking and travel permit at the nearest ranger station and let them know when you expect to return. This, of course, is for your own protection. Now, if you prefer going by horse, saddle horses can be rented at many of the hotels, but you're required to have a guide. As a matter of fact, you can organize or join a scheduled ride into the wilderness if you like. You can get details on these expeditions at the transportation desk of the park's hotels. Speaking of hotels, there are many good ones in the park. They're run by concessionaires who are under the supervision of the National Park Service. You know, many visitors camp in the park each year, but camping in Yellowstone in the early days sometimes was very risky and not always a picnic. For example, on August 23, 1877, just before sunrise, a party of tourists by the name of Cowan were camped in the lower Geyser Basin, unaware that they were in the path of the retreating Nez Perce Indians, led by Chief Joseph. A group of warriors came up upon the camp and demanded food. "We'll give you no food," shouted Cowan. Enraged, the Indians wrecked the campers' wagon and took George Cowan and his group prisoners and started up what is now called Nez Perce Creek. Some miles later, the Braves held a council. They decided to release their hostages. The now free party started back down the creek, but near panic was felt in the group. All of a sudden, two men bolted into the woods and disappeared. The Indians charged the remainder of the party and demanded to know where the two men had gone. "I don't know," said George Cowan. And at that moment, one of the Braves shot George in the thigh. His wife rushed to his aid, but was dragged away. Another shot rang out, striking George this time in the head. He was left for dead. Well, 2 days later, his wife and the other captives were turned loose to follow the Yellowstone River to freedom. Cowan lay quietly till evening, then slowly raised to feel his head. The bullet had not pierced. An Indian nearby saw him move, shot him again. Thinking he was dead for sure this time, the Indians left. Cowan dared not move until night fell, and then he slowly crawled away. He crawled through the night and day for 60 hours. 9 miles later, he reached his camp. Passing soldiers in pursuit of the Indians found him there. They left him food and a fire and told him of wagons soon to arrive. George ate and then slept. The fire spread. He awoke from the heat and smoke, trapped in the center. He crawled to safety through the flames. The army wagon soon came, and one of the wagons was dispatched to take the injured man to a nearby ranch on the Yellowstone River. Word was sent to his wife. She hired a wagon to bring him to Bozeman, Montana. On the way, another freak accident occurred, and the wagon and riders fell into a canyon. The wagon and the occupants were retrieved. Finished the trip. In the hotel at Bozeman, a doctor came to check old George, and as he sat on the bed, it collapsed. Through all of this, George Cowan survived and was to go on and live a full, rich life beyond his unique Yellowstone adventure. One of the park's greatest attractions is its breathtaking floral displays. From the time the snow first leaves at the lower elevations and as the melting gradually increases going toward higher elevations, from very early spring until late autumn, the visitor will notice a dazzling array of multicolored flora. These beauties bloom continually from the time they can first peek through until late into autumn. The visitor will constantly be amazed at the variety and the fact that there are flowers in bloom in the meadows and valleys, along alpine slopes, continually adding grace to the natural wonders of this region. Depending on which botanist would give you the figure, between 5,000 and 7,000 varieties of wild grasses, shrubs, bushes, and mountain wildflowers are predominant in the Rocky Mountain area. and especially in Yellowstone, has over 1,000 varieties of shrubs, plants, and flowers that run rampant, parade before the visitor. Shrubs are really too numerous to list and vary drastically with the habitat. Sagebrush and rabbitbrush are common in the drier sections, while willows indicate a moist, damp area. Species of alder, red raspberry, gooseberry, huckleberry, baneberry, wintergreen, woodland strawberry, chokecherry, wild rose, and fragrant mint plants are found throughout the park. The exciting floral spectacle begins in early spring in the valleys and progresses up the mountainsides, reaching a climax about mid-August. A burst of scarlet berries and gold, yellow, and orange leaves announce the coming of autumn. As flowers begin to show off their beautiful colors in higher elevations, those below are finishing or changing their patterns. Some of the endless variety of flowers and grasses and their interesting names that you will find are yellow skunk cabbage, wild lily of the valley, dogtooth violet, leopard lily, fairy bells, mountain lady slipper, lady's tresses, steer's head, crazy weed, wild licorice, bluebonnet, blazing star, evening primrose, fireweed, cow parsnip, squaw bush, kinnikinick, shooting star, Jacob's ladder, sky pilot, morning glory, horse mince, owl clover, butter and eggs, elephant head, parrot's beak, pussy toes, and elk thistle. Wildflowers grow throughout the park, but are more profuse in the higher alpine meadows where precipitation is heavier. One of the most fascinating of all the park's flowers is the one called bear grass. How this lovely blossom got its name is a total mystery. It neither belongs to the bears, nor is it grass. It belongs, in fact, to the lily family. The bear grass, which is found in small numbers in Yellowstone, breaks out into the open in early June on the floors of the valley and continues blossoming in the higher elevations right through till August. During the latter part of the season, you can find a profusion of purple asters showing off their colorful flower heads along the roadsides. Other brightly colored flowers you'll find in the park are the red and yellow monkey flower, Indian paintbrush, buttercup, purple onion. You'll find moss pinks, too, alpine forget-me-nots, yellow-flowered St. John's wort, blue gentian, red and white heather, mountain laurel, and, just hundreds of others. At no time, from early spring until late fall, can you fail to find a colorful, phantasmagoric flower show. On our tour, we're bound to run across a big, awkward, photogenic animal of the forest, the moose. He's scattered over the park in numbers from 1,000 to 2,000. This year-round resident has long legs, enabling him to manage quite well in the winter snows. Moose are not herding animals. You'll see loners, family groups, and occasionally several bulls together. I'd suggest you look for them in broken forests and willow-covered meadows, willows being one of their favorite foods. They're often seen in summer in Hayden Valley and near the mouth of Pelican Creek. And in winter, they're seen between Tower Junction and the northeast entrance. The moose maintains itself in winter by eating needles of subalpine fir, Douglas fir, and other conifers, the bark and twigs of willow, birch, and aspen. It's principally a browser on land, but is often seen in summer standing in water several feet deep, plunging its big old head under the water to feed on the bottom. He's usually eating sedges and other underwater plants, and when his head comes up, it's probably just for a breath of air. The moose is the world's largest mammal with antlers. He has a humpback body on stilt legs, big head with pendulous muscles, and massive broad-bladed shoulders. These features make the moose recognizable at some distance. The cow moose, antlerless and less massive, is easy to distinguish from other members of the deer family by her long legs, heavy shoulders, and big muzzle. Although it's sometimes possible to approach these animals quite closely, cows with calves can be belligerent, and bulls during the fall rutting tend to be nasty-tempered. Play it safe. Keep your distance. Tourists traveling the park with early guides were not quite as fortunate and were told very few facts about the many interesting features they saw. After all, few technical facts were known then. Some guides believed the facts that were known were, well, boring. Instead, they made up stories and tales which enticed the unsuspecting visitor. One such tale was that the birds in the thermal basins drank so much hot water they laid hard-boiled eggs. One of the most frequently asked questions in Yellowstone today is, where are the bears? The absence of bears along the park's roads is a major concern of visitors, especially those who were here just a few years ago and saw literally dozens of bears panhandling picnic items from passing cars. Many people conclude that the bears are gone from Yellowstone, an alarming thought that has prompted many a complaint to the nearest ranger. Well, it will be welcome news to all that the bears are alive and well, with the emphasis on the well. Because of a program begun by the National Park Service in 1970, it is no longer worth a bear's time to beg along the roads. The food they used to get there is no longer available. The next question, of course, is why not feed the bears? The answer is very simple: because it's dangerous. Between 1931 and 1969, an average of 45 visitors were injured by bears every year. However, it's dangerous to the bears, too. In that same period, an average of 24 black bears were killed every year, either by cars or by rangers who were forced to destroy bears who became so fearless and aggressive that they were a real threat to visitor safety. So if you see one of the old panhandlers on the road, play it safe. Please don't feed the bears. Our recommended stop is Undine Falls. Watch for the sign. This beautiful 60-foot fall is only one of the many graceful waterfalls in the park. There are over 40 waterfalls of significant height and volume located within the park boundaries. The highest of these is Silver Cord Cascade, a slender 800-foot waterfall on the north rim of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. However, approximately one-half of the park's waterfalls are located in the backcountry, accessible only by trail. One of these backcountry falls, for example, is located in the southwestern area of the park and requires a round-trip hike of 24 or 15 miles, depending on which trail is taken. Time to look for our pullout, Undine Falls. Please turn me off now, but remember, don't forget to turn me on again when you're back on the Grand Loop Road after your stop. Let's keep a sharp eye for the beautiful pronghorn antelope, which is of course not an antelope at all. He is usually seen on the sides of slopes and near grassy or sagebrush areas. Pronghorns stay in this area the year round, and you may be able to get some really fine camera shots. In winter, spring, and fall, concentrations of elk and mule deer are along here, as well as the moose. In the height of the summer tourist season, most have moved back from the roads and into remote higher elevations. But if you keep a sharp watch, you may just see one. The pronghorn, mistakenly called an antelope, is actually the only species of its family. A group distinct from the true antelope, it's a swift and beautiful creature of the plains. It's one Yellowstone animal that you can count on the possibility of seeing any time of the year. It's limited to the northern regions of the park and the Yellowstone River drainage, and a few pronghorns live the year round in the flats of the Gardner, Montana area and on the slopes on either side of the Gardner River toward Mammoth Hot Springs. In spring, many pronghorn migrate up the Yellowstone River, across Blacktail Plateau, and eventually into the Lamar River Valley. But there's too much snow in these areas in the winter, and among Yellowstone's ungulates, the pronghorn is the least tolerant of snow. Before the heavy fall snowstorms, the pronghorn returns to his main winter range. That's at the north end of the park, below Mammoth, where they don't get much snow. Here is available sage and other low-growing shrubs in an open, dry area. Since they depend on fleetness of foot and keen eyesight for protection from predators, the pronghorn avoids the forest. Consequently, they can easily be seen out in the open fields. Although both males and females bear horns and have conspicuous white rump patches like the bighorn, they're easily distinguished. The pronghorn are much smaller, the adults weighing about 100 pounds. Their erect horns curve backwards only at the tip. The body markings are more striking, and they occupy relatively level open areas rather than steep rocky slopes. The pronghorn may have once been more widely distributed in Yellowstone. A warmer period some centuries ago may have created habitat conditions more favorable to pronghorn, even in the central part of the park. Today, however, pronghorn numbers as well as distribution have shrunk. There are between 150 and 200 in residence in the park. Changes of habitat, decreasing availability of winter range, and some of man's activities have all affected the pronghorn numbers. Occasionally, you may see the mule deer in this region of the park. He is the smallest of Yellowstone's 3 members of the deer family, weighs less than a quarter as much as the moose and 1/3 as much as the elk. The large summer population is scattered throughout the park except in dense forests. Look into broken forests and small meadows, for he's a browser rather than a grazer. The mule deer feeds principally on shrubs and coniferous trees. There's plenty of food for their liking during the summer. However, the mule deer cannot tolerate deep snow, so most migrate out of the park in the winter. The small winter population is enlarged in spring by the individuals returning from the Jackson Hole area to the south, Shoshone River drainage to the east, the lower Madison River valleys to the west, and the Yellowstone River Valley to the north. In winter, you can see huge numbers in or near the park around Mammoth Hot Springs, down to Gardner and beyond. The mule deer is preyed upon by cougars and grizzlies, and probably by the park's few wolves. Fawns and weak or crippled adults are very easy prey for the coyote. You should have no trouble recognizing this species. The mule-like ears, body form, white rump patch, size, and a wonderful bouncing, bounding gait set it apart from the other ungulates. The mule deer, because of the black tip on its tail, is also commonly called the black-tailed deer. If you're not planning a backcountry hiking and camping experience on this visit to Yellowstone, consider on some future date to enjoy what the over 1,000 miles of trails have to offer. Just a short distance away from the road that we're now on will provide the hiker or backpacker with a surprising solitude. Just imagine the first rays of the rising morning dawn, the cool morning air with the smell of pine and fresh-caught trout sizzling in a skillet on the campfire. The great American wilderness speaks with a gentle voice. The gurgling sound of clear mountain streams, the quiet beauty of an alpine meadow splashed with wildflowers, the distant cry of an eagle as he soars high over the valleys, peaks, and lakes, and the peace of mind that comes from ending your day with the night sky sparkling with thousands of stars above you. Yellowstone is this for the visitor who desires to touch, feel, smell, and experience the great American wilderness.
Your upcoming facilities at Mammoth include a campground located 1/2 mile north of Mammoth Junction, a general store, auto shop, service station, hotel, cottages, coffee shop, saddle horses, park superintendent's office, medical dispensary, post office, visitor center with museum, and amphitheater. The visitor center contains a superb wildlife exhibit and an excellent program explaining the park. This is the end of this tour. If you're continuing on the Grand Loop Road, change to tape number 2A and turn me on after you leave Mammoth Junction, headed toward Norris Junction. If you're not continuing beyond this point, I do want to thank you for being such nice traveling companions. I hope we'll have the pleasure of taking another CCI auto tape tour in other areas of North America and Europe. You may turn me off now.